The lioness who purred when I touched her limp cub changed both of our lives forever and created a legacy that continues to save lives and build bridges between our worlds. Her impossible trust became the foundation for a relationship that proves every day that miracles are possible when mothers refuse to give up hope. 2 weeks passed, and I had begun to think of my encounter with the lioness and her seemingly dead cub as a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I had documented everything in my research notes, but I knew the scientific community would be skeptical. Wild lions don't seek human help for medical emergencies. They don't purr encouragement during resuscitation efforts. They certainly don't bow in gratitude. But everything changed on November 24th when I heard familiar vocalizations near my camp. Just after sunrise, I looked outside my tent and couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was her. The same lioness with a distinctive black marking above her right ear. But she wasn't alone. She had brought her cub now, a healthy, thriving juvenile, and something else that made my heart race. She had brought another lioness. A different female carrying her own motionless cub. The original lioness approached my camp with confidence, leading the second female to within 20 meters of my position. Then she did something that proved the intelligence behind our previous encounter. She demonstrated. She placed her healthy cub on the ground and then gently pushed him down into a limp position, mimicking the state he had been in 2 weeks earlier. She was showing the other lioness what I had done. She was teaching. The second lioness watched this demonstration with intense focus. When the original lioness looked at me and made the same soft vocalization she had used during our first encounter, the newcomer understood. She approached slowly and placed her own limp cub on the ground between us. She was following the protocol that had been established. She was seeking human medical assistance based on the success story she had been told. This second cub was in even worse condition than the first had been. The little female showed no signs of life whatsoever and had clearly been unconscious for a longer period. But her mother had brought her to me based on nothing more than another lioness's testimony about human healing abilities. The trust required for such an action was staggering. I began the same examination procedures I had used 2 weeks earlier. The cub's vital signs were even weaker than the first case, but there was still a faint heartbeat detectable with careful palpation. As I worked, both lionesses watched intently. The original lioness was purring softly, as if she was coaching me through the process, while the newcomer remained silent but alert. The resuscitation took longer this time. The cub's condition was more critical, and her response to treatment was slower. But gradually her breathing strengthened, her heart rate improved, and consciousness began to return. The moment her eyes opened, both lionesses made sounds of relief and joy. They were celebrating together. Two mothers sharing the miracle of their children's recovery. Dr. Patricia Monji from the University of Zambia arrived 3 days later to investigate reports of unusual lion behavior in my research area. She was initially convinced that I was misinterpreting normal animal interactions, but after reviewing my documentation and witnessing similar behavior firsthand, she became one of the most vocal advocates for recognizing the complex cognitive abilities of wild predators. The breakthrough came when we installed motion-activated cameras around my camp. The footage revealed that lionesses were visiting my research site regularly, even when I wasn't present. They would approach the area where I had performed the resuscitations and then position themselves as if they were waiting for medical assistance. Word was spreading through the lion community about the human who could bring cubs back from the dead. But the most incredible discovery came when we analyzed the social dynamics of these visits. The lionesses weren't just seeking help individually. They were bringing witnesses, other females who would observe the treatment process and then presumably share that information with their own prides. We were witnessing the transmission of cultural knowledge in real time. The validation came 6 weeks after the second rescue, when a third lioness approached my camp following the exact same protocol. She carried what appeared to be a dead cub, placed it on the ground at a respectful distance, and then waited for my assistance. The behavior had been learned, replicated, and was spreading throughout the local population. This third case was the most challenging yet. The cub had been unconscious for what appeared to be several hours and showed almost no detectable vital signs. But his mother's faith was absolute. She had traveled what must have been many kilometers to bring her child to the human healer she had heard about. Her trust was based entirely on second-hand information passed down through the young lion community. The resuscitation required every technique I had learned in 14 years of veterinary practice. I used manual chest compressions, artificial respiration, and even improvised cardiac stimulation. The lioness watched every procedure with unwavering attention, occasionally vocalizing what sounded like encouragement. She was participating in her child's rescue as actively as her species would allow. When the cub finally responded and began breathing normally, the lioness's reaction was extraordinary. She didn't just purr or show relief. She approached me directly and began grooming my hands with her rough tongue. She was treating me like a member of her pride. She was showing the same maternal care toward me that she showed toward her own offspring. Dr. Manji documented everything with professional equipment, and her footage became crucial evidence for the scientific community. We were recording the evolution of a new form of interspecies cooperation that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence and cultural transmission. The original lioness had become the founder of a medical tradition in lion society. Over the following months, I treated 8 more apparently dead cubs, all brought to me by different lionesses, following the same protocol. Each case taught me something new about the mysterious condition that was affecting the local cub population. It appeared to be a form of toxin-induced coma, possibly from contaminated water sources during the dry season. But the most meaningful development was the ongoing relationship with the original lioness who had started this unprecedented medical practice. She continued to visit my camp regularly, not because she needed help, but because she wanted to maintain the bond we had formed. These were social calls. She was treating me as an extended family member. The young cub I had first saved grew into a magnificent juvenile who showed no fear of humans whatsoever. He would approach my camp with complete confidence, often playing in the area while his mother rested nearby. I was witnessing the development of a new generation of lions who viewed humans as potential allies rather than automatic threats. The scientific community took serious notice when Dr. Monji published our findings in the journal Nature. Researchers from around the world came to study what became known as the Stevens Protocol. We were documenting behavioral evolution in real time, showing how individual experiences could become cultural knowledge passed down through generations. And across pride boundaries, the story reached international attention when the BBC featured our work in a documentary called The Lions Who Trust Humans. The footage of that first encounter, when the lioness had purged encouragement as I touched her apparently dead cub, became one of the most viewed wildlife videos in internet history. But for me, the real significance wasn't the fame or recognition. Breakthrough moment came when the original lioness brought her son back to my camp as a young adult. But this time, he wasn't seeking help. He was introducing his own mate to the human who had saved his life. I watched as he demonstrated the same trusting behavior. His mother had taught him approaching me without fear and even allowing physical contact. Today, 2 years after a lioness shocked me by purring encouragement when I touched her limp cub, my research camp has become an unofficial veterinary clinic for the lion population of South Luangwa. The Zambian Wildlife Authority has provided official recognition and support for this unique conservation program. What started as one mother's desperate trust has grown into a model for human-wildlife medical cooperation. The original lioness is now a grandmother and her extended family includes cubs from multiple generations, all of whom view me as a trusted healer and protector. When I see her approaching my camp with that familiar, confident stride, I'm reminded of how far we've come from that first afternoon, when she placed her apparently lifeless cub between us and asked me to work a miracle. The trust she showed me that day wasn't just about saving one cub. It was about opening a door between two worlds and proving that desperation can overcome any barrier between species. Her purr of encouragement when I touched her seemingly dead baby was the beginning of a conversation that continues to this day. She taught me that sometimes the most profound connections are born from the most impossible circumstances. Every morning when I wake up in the Zambian wilderness, I'm grateful for that moment when a desperate mother taught me that love knows no boundaries between species. Her shock-inducing response to my touch opened a channel of communication that has grown stronger with each passing day. She showed me that trust once given can bridge any gap between human and predator and create possibilities that neither species could achieve alone. I've been a field veterinarian in Zambia's South Luangwa National Park for 14 years, and I thought I had seen every possible scenario involving wild predators until the day a lioness taught me that maternal instinct can override millions of years of evolutionary programming. What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you believe about the protective nature of wild animals and the impossible decisions a mother will make when facing the unthinkable. My name is Dr. Rachel Stevens, and this is the story that changed my understanding of trust between species forever. It was November 8th, 2023, around 3:30 p.m. when I first spotted her through my binoculars. I was conducting routine health surveys from my mobile clinic when I noticed a lioness moving erratically through the tall grass about 200 meters away. Her gait was wrong. She wasn't moving with the fluid confidence of an apex predator. Instead, she was stumbling slightly, favoring her left hind leg, and her massive head hung low with what appeared to be exhaustion or grief. As she got closer, I could see she was carrying something in her mouth. At first I assumed it was prey, but the size and shape were all wrong. It was too small for an antelope, too large for a bird. Through my telephoto lens, I realized with growing horror what she was carrying. It was a cub, a tiny limp cub that showed no signs of movement or life. The lioness was walking directly toward my vehicle. In 14 years of fieldwork, I had never seen a wild lion approach human presence voluntarily. They avoid us instinctively. It's their survival mechanism. But this lioness was different. She was walking with purpose despite her obvious distress. She had somewhere important to be, and that somewhere was apparently wherever I was. At 50 meters, she stopped and gently placed the cub on the ground. Even from that distance, I could see the tiny body was completely motionless. There was no rise and fall of breathing, no twitching of ears or tail, no signs of life whatsoever. The cub appeared to be dead, and its mother was carrying it like she couldn't accept that reality. What happened next defied every instinct that should have governed her behavior. Instead of retreating with her cub to grieve in private, she looked directly at my vehicle and began walking toward me again. She was approaching a human with her most precious possession in the most vulnerable moment of her life. The trust required for such an action was beyond anything I had ever witnessed in wild animal behavior. At 20 meters, she stopped again and made a sound I had never heard from a lion before. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was something softer, more desperate. It was the sound of a mother who had run out of options and was asking for help from the only source she could find. She was vocalizing to me. A wild lioness was trying to communicate with a human about her dead child. I slowly exited my vehicle, keeping my movements calm and predictable. The lioness watched every gesture, but showed no signs of aggression. Her ears weren't pinned back. Her tail wasn't lashing, and her body posture wasn't threatening. Instead, she looked defeated, broken, like she was carrying a burden, too heavy for even her powerful frame to bear. As I approached, I could see the full extent of the tragedy. The cub was a male, maybe 10 weeks old, and he was completely limping. His mother's gentle grip. His eyes were closed, his tiny tongue hung from his mouth, and there was no visible breathing. He looked like he had been dead for some time. But his mother was carrying him like he might wake up at any moment. The lioness placed the cub on the ground between us and backed away 3 steps. She was presenting her child to me, offering him for my inspection or help or whatever miracle I might be able to provide. The desperation in her golden eyes was heartbreaking. She was asking me to do anything to bring her baby back to life. I knelt beside the motionless cub and began my examination. His body was cold to the touch and showed no signs of rigor mortis, which meant death had been recent. There were no visible wounds or injuries, no signs of trauma or attack. This appeared to be a case of sudden illness or possibly poisoning from contaminated water or prey. But as I placed my hands on the tiny body to check for any remaining vital signs, something extraordinary happened. The moment my fingers touched the cub's chest, the lioness made a sound that stopped my heart. It wasn't a warning growl or a protective snarl. It was a purr, a deep rumbling purr of encouragement. She was telling me it was okay to touch her baby. A wild lioness was giving me permission to handle her most precious possession. I pressed my ear to the cub's chest, listening for any sign of a heartbeat. Nothing. I checked his pulse points, feeling for any flutter of life. Still nothing. But the lioness continued purring, watching my every movement with intense focus. She believed I could help. She had faith that human touch might accomplish what her own maternal instincts could not. Then I felt it. The faintest flutter beneath my fingertips. A heartbeat so weak it was barely detectable. The cub wasn't dead. He was in some kind of coma or deep unconsciousness that mimicked death. His vital signs were so depressed that they were almost undetectable, but there was still life in his tiny body. Looked up at the lioness and saw something in her eyes that made me understand why she had brought her cub to me. She had known. Somehow she had sensed that her baby was still alive when everything suggested otherwise. Her maternal instincts were more sensitive than any medical equipment I possessed. She had detected signs of life that were invisible to human observation. Lioness approached closer now, only 2 meters away. She was watching my face, reading my expressions, trying to determine if I had found what she already knew was there. When I nodded and spoke softly, telling her that her baby was alive, she made a sound that can only be described as a sob of relief mixed with desperate hope. Immediately began emergency resuscitation procedures. I cleared the cub's airway, checked for obstructions, and began gentle chest compressions to stimulate his heart. The lioness watched every movement, her purring growing louder, as if she was encouraging both me and her cub. She was participating in the rescue effort in the only way she knew how. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the cub's breathing became more regular. His heart rate strengthened, and his body temperature began to rise. Color returned to his gums, and his tiny paws began to twitch with returning consciousness. He was coming back to life under the combined efforts of human medical intervention and his mother's unwavering faith. The lioness's reaction when her cub opened his eyes was one of the most beautiful things I have ever witnessed. She immediately began grooming him, checking every inch of his tiny body with her rough tongue. She was welcoming him back to the world of the living with the same intensity she had shown in refusing to accept his apparent death. But what happened next shocked me even more than her initial trust. As the cub grew stronger and began to mew softly, the lioness looked directly at me and did something unprecedented. She bowed her massive head in what could only be interpreted as gratitude. She was thanking me for helping her accomplish what she couldn't do alone. A wild lioness was showing respect and appreciation to a human. Over the next hour, I continued monitoring the cub's recovery, while his mother maintained her protective vigil. The little one's condition improved steadily, and soon he was trying to nurse and move around on his own. Whatever had caused his near-death state was passing, and he was returning to normal cub behavior. As the sun began to set, the lioness gently picked up her recovered cub and prepared to leave. But before departing, she approached me one final time and did something that defied every law of predator behavior. She rubbed her massive head against my shoulder in a gesture of affection and gratitude. She was treating me like a member of her pride, like someone who had earned a place in her family through my actions. Watched them disappear into the African twilight, and thought that would be the end of our extraordinary encounter. A miraculous moment when human and predator had worked together to save a life. But I had no idea that this was just the beginning of a relationship that would challenge everything scientists believed about interspecies, communication, and trust.